Hey, what's up? This time, we're going to talk about a story that will make you think twice before walking alone at night. Grab some snacks, turn off the lights, and listen closely. In the dead of night, the whispering woods stretch into endless darkness. The wind blows softly, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Among the towering trees, something whispers, a faint voice slithering through the air, blending with the sounds of the night. No one knows where it comes from, but those who have wandered too far into the forest all say the same thing. The whispers call their names. That night, a young man named Jared walked along a narrow path, his steps hesitant. The moonlight barely pierced through the thick canopy, making everything look even more sinister. His flashlight trembled in his unsteady grip. He shouldn't have been here, but curiosity was always humanity's greatest enemy. A sound echoed behind him, not just the rustling of leaves or the chirping of insects, but something else, something whispering right in his ear, though no one was there. Jared quickened his pace, but every direction he turned felt like a trap. The trees around him looked identical, offering no hint of a way out. He had tried retracing his steps, but everything seemed the same. His breathing became heavier, mixing with the sudden chill that crept through the air. His rational mind tried to find an explanation. Maybe he was just panicking. Maybe his brain was conjuring illusions out of fear. But the whispers persisted, growing clearer, closer. They were no longer just murmurs, but words spoken with eerie insistence. His name, Jared. Jared. His heart pounded against his ribs. He could no longer think straight. His sweaty fingers almost dropped the flashlight, but he gripped it tighter. He was not alone in the forest. He knew that now. From the corner of his eye, something darted between the trees. There was no clear shape, just a fleeting shadow playing at the edge of his vision. Jared turned, but nothing was there. The whispers had gone quieter, as if they were waiting for his reaction. He swallowed hard, feeling his whole body tense. The shadow reappeared, this time closer. For a moment, he thought it was just a trick of the light, an illusion of movement in the darkness. But the longer he stared, the clearer it became that something was shifting among the trees. And then he saw it. A tall figure stood motionless behind a thick tree trunk, revealing only part of its body. Its form was indistinct, but there was something terrifying about the way it remained still, as if watching, waiting. Jared didn't hesitate. He turned and ran, desperate to escape. His breath came in short, ragged gasps as he sprinted forward. The flashlight in his grasp barely helped. Every part of the forest looked the same, dark, disorienting, with no sign of a way out. Without realizing it, he was running deeper into the woods. The trees grew denser, their branches clawing at his face and arms. His footsteps were uneven, but he couldn't stop. The shadow he had seen earlier felt closer now, chasing him, closing in from behind. The whispers had changed. They were no longer just murmurs calling his name, but hushed laughter, as if multiple unseen mouths were giggling in amusement at his fear. Jared felt surrounded by something invisible. He tried to push down the rising panic, but his body was betraying him. This was not an ordinary forest. This was a place humans were never meant to enter. Suddenly, his foot caught on an exposed root. His body lurched forward, crashing hard onto the damp earth, sending a flurry of dried leaves into the air. His flashlight tumbled several feet ahead, its flickering beam barely illuminating the surroundings. In the suffocating silence, Jared turned his head back. The shadow he had only glimpsed before now stood directly in front of him. It was taller than any human, with an impossibly thin frame and a face that seemed blurred, lacking definite features. Its eyes were empty, void-like, yet Jared could feel it smiling at him despite the absence of mouth. And then, something grabbed his ankle. A long, blood-curdling scream shattered the quiet night. The sound carried through the trees, rising before fading into nothingness. In the distance, the wind whispered softly, carrying a familiar sound. Jared's name was still being spoken, over and over, even though the one who bore that name was no longer there. The forest was silent again, as if nothing had happened. The only movement came from the dim, flickering flashlight lying a few feet away, its dying beam barely illuminating the forest floor. The damp earth where Jared had fallen was disturbed, as though something had dragged him away. But there were no footprints, No sign of a struggle, just a strange, dark stain seeping into the soil, absorbing the light in an unnatural way. The whispering had stopped. The laughter had ceased. Only the wind remained, weaving through the trees like unseen fingers brushing against the bark. The flashlight sputtered, its light momentarily revealing something half buried beneath the leaves. A small, rusted locket, glinting in the weak glow. It had not been there before. The locket's delicate chain was broken, its surface scratched and stained with something dark. Inside, there was a photograph, a black and white image of a young woman, her face partially obscured by a blur, as if time itself had tried to erase her. Beneath the photo, a name was faintly etched into the metal. Eleanor. Far beyond the clearing where Jared had disappeared, something else stirred. The trees groaned softly, as if adjusting to the presence of an unseen force. A figure stood among the shadows, motionless, its gaze fixed on the empty space where Jared had been moments before. It was not the same entity that had taken him. This presence was different, silent, watchful. The wind carried no whispers in its wake, only the heavy stillness of something ancient, waiting. The figure did not move, did not breathe, yet the forest seemed to respond to it. Leaves rustled without wind. The ground trembled without cause. And then, after a long, agonizing moment, it turned and vanished into the trees, as if it had never been there at all. The locket on the ground gleamed one last time before the flashlight gave its final flicker and died, plunging the forest into total darkness once more. The next morning, the town of Ashwood stirred awake with its usual quiet routine. The sun cast a golden glow over the rooftops, washing away the night's chill. Shopkeepers opened their stores, school children hurried along the sidewalks, and life continued as normal. But there was one problem. Jared never came home. His roommate, Daniel, was the first to notice. Jared's bed was untouched. His phone lay on a nightstand with unread messages. Calls went straight to voicemail. By noon, his friends had started to worry. By evening, the police were involved. Everyone in town knew the stories about the Whispering Woods. They knew about the disappearances, the strange occurrences, the whispers that never seemed to have a source. But no one ever talked about it, not publicly. Now, with another missing person, the whispers were bound to return. This time, not just in the forest. By nightfall, a group of volunteers, led by local authorities, ventured into the forest, armed with flashlights and radio equipment. They moved in formation, calling Jared's name into the endless sea of trees. The deeper they went, the more unnatural everything felt. The air grew thick, heavy with an unplaceable scent. Damp earth mixed with something metallic. The wind had died down completely, and yet leaves still rustled around them as if unseen hands were stirring them. One of the searchers, Officer Graham, stopped in his tracks. His flashlight beam had caught something unusual ahead. A clearing, one that shouldn't have been there, not according to the maps. In the center of it lay an object that made his stomach twist into knots. A flashlight. It was Jared's, still intact but lifeless. Beside it, half buried in the leaves, was a rusted locket. The same one that had been found years ago during another search for another missing person. The search party fell silent. No one wanted to be the first to speak. The radio crackled with static, drowning out the sound of their shallow breaths. Something was wrong. Deeply, profoundly wrong. Then it happened. A whisper, soft, nearly imperceptible, but unmistakable. It slithered through the air like a breathless murmur, wrapping around them in the darkness. Daniel, Jared's roommate, who had insisted on joining the search, felt his blood turn to ice. Someone, or something, was calling his name. The name, Daniel's name, floated through the darkness, barely more than a breath. It came from nowhere and everywhere at once, wrapping around them like an invisible mist. Daniel's heart pounded so loudly in his chest that he swore the others could hear it. His breath hitched, and his fingers clenched around his flashlight, but the beam wavered. The search party exchanged uneasy glances. No one spoke. No one dared to acknowledge what they had all just heard. Then, another whisper. Daniel. It was softer this time, almost affectionate, as if whatever was calling him wanted him to come closer. Officer Graham swallowed hard and took a step forward. "We should go," he muttered, his voice lower than a whisper. Now, no one argued. They turned back the way they had come, moving quickly but carefully. The tension in the air was suffocating, pressing against them from all sides. The trees, once familiar, now seemed impossibly tall, their trunks stretching endlessly upward, their branches clawing at the sky. Daniel kept his eyes straight ahead, refusing to look into the trees. He had heard the stories about those who glanced into the darkness and never looked away again. But the path wasn't right. They should have reached the main road by now. The journey back should have been simple, 20 minutes at most. But the more they walked, the more the path seemed to stretch. The trees ahead of them never changed, as if they were moving in place, trapped in a forest that refused to let them go. Does anyone else feel like one of the volunteers started, but his words were cut short when the ground beneath them shifted? Not an earthquake, not the wind, something else, something alive. The dirt path rippled like water, subtle but unmistakable. A deep, groaning sound echoed through the trees, followed by the unmistakable feeling of something watching them. Daniel's breathing became ragged. His legs felt heavy, like he was wading through something unseen. He tried to move faster, but his limbs wouldn't obey. Then movement between the trees, just at the edge of their vision, shadows flickered. Not the kind cast by moonlight, but something darker, something that moved on its own. One shadow stretched impossibly tall, its form flickering like a candle's flame in the wind. Another seemed to melt into the trunk of a tree, disappearing only to reappear a few feet closer. And then, in the distance, came the sound of footsteps. Not one, not two, dozens. Daniel's legs finally responded, and he broke into a run. He didn't care about the others anymore. His instinct screamed at him to escape, to get out before it was too late. But the moment he turned, he saw it. A figure stood directly in his path, only a few feet away. It wasn't human. It was tall, unnaturally so, its body thin and stretched like its limbs had been pulled apart. Its skin was grayish, almost translucent, and its face, it had no face. No eyes, no mouth, nothing but a smooth, featureless surface. And yet, somehow, Daniel knew it was looking at him. Then, from the blank face, a voice emerged. His own voice. Daniel. A scream tore through the night. Whether it was Daniel's or someone else's, he couldn't tell. The search party scattered. Some ran blindly into the trees. Others dropped their flashlights and fell to their knees, paralyzed by fear. Officer Graham shouted for order, but his voice was lost in the growing cacophony of whispers. The footsteps grew louder, closer, surrounding them. Daniel turned and ran, not knowing where he was going, only that he needed to get away. But deep down, he knew the truth. No one ever truly left the Whispering Woods. Panic spread like wildfire. The search party was no longer a unit. Everyone was running in different directions, their shouts lost in the overwhelming silence of the forest. The only sounds that remained were their frantic footsteps and the whispers slithering through the trees. Daniel ran, his breath coming in short, desperate gasps. His flashlight beam trembled as he moved, illuminating glimpses of twisted tree trunks and shifting shadows. Then, a scream. One of the volunteers, a man named Carter, had vanished from sight. Just seconds ago, he had been running alongside another searcher, but now, only empty space remained where he had been. No sign of struggle, no footprints leading away, just gone. The whispers grew louder, overlapping in a haunting, chaotic melody. One by one, the others started disappearing, their screams cut short before they could finish. Daniel didn't look back. He couldn't. His lungs burned as he sprinted through the endless maze of trees. The forest felt infinite, stretching far beyond what he remembered. But then, the ground beneath his feet changed. It was no longer soft earth, but something damp, sticky. His shoes sank slightly, and the air around him thickened with a putrid stench. He looked down. The forest floor was covered in dark, viscous liquid, pooling like ink. The substance clung to his shoes, thick and unnatural. And then, just a few feet ahead, he saw them. Bodies. At first, he thought they were just figures in the shadows, but the closer he looked, the clearer they became. Dozens of them, some barely visible, others partially submerged in the strange black liquid. Their faces were twisted in silent screams, their eyes wide open but lifeless. Daniel stumbled back, his stomach churning. Some of them looked fresh, others decayed, Their skin fused into the earth as if the forest itself had claimed them. And in the middle of them all, something moved. A hand, pale, thin, reaching up from the inky blackness. It was Jared's. Daniel's breath hitched. Every muscle in his body screamed for him to run, but he couldn't move. His legs were frozen in place, his mind struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. Then the voice came, not from the whispers in the trees, not from the faceless figure, but directly inside his head. Stay. It was calm, commanding. It wasn't asking. It was telling. Daniel's entire body felt cold, like an invisible force had wrapped around him. His knees buckled, his vision blurred. The whispering around him had stopped, replaced by an overwhelming, deafening silence. He wanted to move, wanted to scream, but his body refused to obey. The hand in the black liquid twitched, its fingers curling slightly, as if trying to reach for him. Then, the voice spoke again. You belong here. The air around him grew impossibly dense. A strange pressure pressed against his skull, making his thoughts feel slow, fragmented. Then, the presence returned. The faceless figure stepped into the dim light of his flashlight, its long limbs moving in an eerily fluid motion. It stood between Daniel and the reaching hand, as if separating him from whatever lay beneath the black liquid. Even without a face, Daniel could feel its gaze on him, watching, studying. Then, it tilted its head slightly. A response. The realization sent a fresh wave of terror through him. It wasn't just a mindless entity. It was aware. It was intelligent. And it was deciding what to do with him. Something inside him snapped. A survival instinct buried deep within his core pushed through the overwhelming fear. His body finally obeyed. With everything he had left, Daniel turned and ran. The forest around him blurred as he sprinted, his legs moving on pure adrenaline. He didn't know where he was going. He didn't care. Behind him, the whispers roared back to life, louder and more frantic than before. The faceless entity did not chase him. It did not need to. The forest itself would ensure he never left. Daniel sprinted through the trees, his pulse hammering in his ears. His breath came in ragged gasps, but he didn't dare slow down. The whispers had turned into a cacophony, rising and falling like a sinister chant. Then the path changed. It wasn't subtle. One moment he was running toward the direction he thought led back to town, and the next the ground beneath him twisted. The trees around him seemed to stretch unnaturally, their trunks contorting like living things. The path he had just taken was gone. Panic clawed at his chest. He turned sharply, trying to retrace his steps, but the forest no longer made sense. Landmarks that should have been there had vanished. A massive tree that had been on his left was suddenly in front of him. No matter which way he turned, he was being led deeper. You belong here, the voice whispered again, slithering through his mind like a parasite. Daniel pushed forward, his flashlight flickering as the batteries struggled to keep up. Shadows twisted around him, moving in ways that defied logic. But worse than the shifting landscape was the presence behind him. He couldn't see it. He couldn't hear footsteps, but he felt it. Something was following him, not close enough to touch, but never far enough to escape. Every time he glanced over his shoulder, there was nothing there, just the dark void of the forest. But he could feel its weight pressing down on him, something unseen and patient. It was waiting for him to make a mistake. Through the suffocating darkness, something appeared ahead. A structure, a cabin, barely visible through the thickening fog. It shouldn't have been there. The search maps of the forest had never mentioned any structures, but right now, Daniel didn't care. He ran toward it, his legs threatening to give out beneath him. The cabin was old, its wooden planks warped and rotting. The door was slightly ajar, swaying with the wind that didn't exist. Daniel hesitated for only a second before stepping inside. The air inside was thick with dust, the scent of decay clinging to every surface. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, untouched for years. The walls were covered in deep scratches, like something had tried to claw its way out. And in the center of the room, lying on a broken table, was Jared's backpack. Daniel's stomach twisted as he reached for the bag with trembling hands. It was covered in dirt, as if it had been buried before being placed here. The zipper was halfway open. Inside were Jared's belongings, his flashlight, his notebook, his phone, screen cracked, battery dead. But there was something else. A piece of paper, folded neatly and tucked into the side pocket. Daniel unfolded it, his fingers shaking. The handwriting was messy, hurried, written in thick, dark strokes. Don't listen to them. Don't look at them. If you see her, run. Beneath the words, Something had been scratched into the paper over and over. A name, Eleanor. As soon as he read it, the cabin groaned. The wood beneath his feet trembled, and the whispers returned, louder than before. This time they were inside with him. Daniel froze. A knock, not from the door, not from the walls, from beneath the floor. Slow, deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. He staggered backward, his breath shallow. The whispers twisted into something else, a soft humming, like an old lullaby sung off-key. Then the knocking stopped. For a brief moment, silence. Then, with a loud crack, the floor split open. Something was coming out. Daniel stumbled back, his heartbeat thundering in his ears as the wooden planks beneath him splintered. The floor cracked open wider, revealing a gaping void beneath the cabin. Then, a hand emerged. It was pale, impossibly thin, its skin stretched tight over fragile bones. The fingers were long, too long, each tipped with blackened, splintered nails. They curled, gripping the edge of the broken floor with an eerie slowness, as if savoring the moment. Daniel couldn't breathe. His legs refused to move. Then, another hand appeared, gripping the floor beside the first. Whoever, or whatever, was down there was pulling itself up. The whispering around him rose to a fever pitch, the voices overlapping, calling his name, laughing, weeping, screaming all at once. And then, in the flickering beam of his dying flashlight, a face began to rise from the darkness. At first, it was just a shadow, shifting in the gloom beneath the floorboards. Then, her head lifted into view. Eleanor. Her skin was sallow and stretched tight over her skull, her hair falling in matted clumps over her face. Her lips barely moved, but her mouth never closed completely, hanging slightly open, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too jagged. But it was her eyes that sent ice through Daniel's veins. They were hollow, deep, black voids that seemed to pull everything into them, endless and empty. And yet, he knew she was looking directly at him. She didn't blink. She didn't breathe. Then, slowly, her lips curled into something that might have been a smile. Found you. Daniel's body finally responded. He stumbled back, nearly tripping over a broken chair. His mind screamed at him to run, but the cabin had changed. The walls were shifting, the wooden planks groaning like living flesh. Dark liquid oozed from the cracks, thick and slow, dripping onto the floor in steady, rhythmic drops. It wasn't water. It smelled of rust, of decay, of something long dead and buried. Daniel's breath came in ragged gasps. His flashlight flickered, the beam barely illuminating the nightmare unfolding around him. The whispering voices were no longer just in his head. They were coming from the walls, from the floor, from Eleanor herself. The entire cabin was alive, and it wanted him to stay. His survival instincts took over. He lunged toward the door, ignoring the way the cabin walls pulsed as if breathing. His fingers wrapped around the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The wood had fused together, trapping him inside. Behind him, Eleanor moved, her body unfolded from the hole in the floor, her limbs bending at unnatural angles. The way she crawled forward, too fast, too smooth, sent a primal terror racing through Daniel's veins. With a desperate cry, he threw himself at the window. The glass shattered as he crashed through, shards slicing into his arms. The cold night air hit him like a shock, but he didn't stop. He scrambled to his feet and ran, ignoring the pain, ignoring the blood trailing behind him. He didn't dare look back, because he knew Eleanor was right behind him. Daniel ran blindly into the trees, the branches clawing at his skin as he pushed forward. The whispers were no longer just around him. They were inside him, burrowing deep into his thoughts. The forest had no end. No matter how far he ran, no matter how many times he turned, the trees stretched on forever, their silhouettes forming a prison of endless black. And then, ahead of him, something moved. A figure stood in the path, tall and waiting. Not Eleanor. Something worse. Daniel skidded to a stop, his chest heaving. His mind screamed at him to run, but his body refused to move. The figure stepped closer, the darkness clinging to it like a second skin. Then, with a voice that did not belong to this world, it spoke. Welcome home. Daniel stood frozen, his breath shallow, his pulse hammering in his ears. The figure ahead of him was impossibly still, its outline shifting like a shadow cast by an unseen light. Then it moved, not with the jerky, unnatural movements of Eleanor, but with an eerie grace, smooth, calculated, deliberate. As it stepped into the dim glow of Daniel's flickering flashlight, its true form was revealed. It was tall, its limbs too long, its fingers tapering into razor-like points. Its skin was the color of old parchment, stretched impossibly thin over its bones. But its face, or lack thereof, was what made Daniel's stomach twist. Where a face should have been, there was only a blank expanse of skin, smooth and featureless. And yet, somehow, Daniel felt its gaze locked onto him, cold and unyielding. Then, slowly, impossibly, the skin began to shift. A mouth formed, wide, stretching far beyond human proportions. And then it smiled. His instinct screamed at him to run. He turned, bolting in the opposite direction, his breath coming in ragged gasps. But the forest had other plans. The trees moved, not swaying, not bending, but physically shifting. Paths that had been opened seconds ago, sealed shut with thick, gnarled roots twisting together like fingers locking into place. The ground beneath his feet softened, like he was running on something alive. No matter where he turned, he was trapped. A chilling realization settled into his bones. This wasn't just a haunted forest. The forest itself was a living entity, and it wanted him. The whispers that had plagued him since the beginning grew louder, but now they weren't just disembodied voices. They were calling his name. Each voice sounded different, some familiar, some completely unknown. But worse than that, some of them sounded like his own. Daniel, this way. Daniel, don't run. Daniel, let go. They were overlapping, colliding, distorting. Some sounded pleading, others were laughing, and some were screaming. Daniel clamped his hands over his ears, but it didn't help. The voices weren't coming from around him anymore. They were inside him. His vision blurred. The forest melted away, replaced by something else. Flashes of images, disjointed, fragmented, rushed through his mind. A woman, standing in a clearing, her face hidden beneath a veil of tangled black hair. Her arms stretched out toward him, her fingers unnaturally long, her nails broken and bloody. A group of people, their faces rotting, their mouths stretched open in silent screams. Their eyes, black voids, hollow and endless. Jared's body, limp and twisted, his mouth moving soundlessly as if trying to speak. And then, the worst of them all, himself. Daniel saw himself standing in the forest, but different. His eyes were gone, replaced by deep, empty sockets. His lips curled into a smile, too wide, too unnatural. His own voice whispered in his ear, "You were never meant to leave." A jolt of pain shot through his body, snapping him back into reality. He was lying on the ground, his head pounding, his limbs weak. The forest was silent. For a moment he hoped that it had all been a nightmare. But then he noticed something. The trees around him were different. Denser. The air felt heavier, the darkness deeper than before. And worst of all, his flashlight was gone. So was his backpack. And his arms were covered in deep scratches, fresh, raw, bleeding, like something had been holding him down. A cold dread slithered down his spine as he slowly stood up. Somewhere in the distance, the whispers began again. And this time, they were laughing. Daniel stood there, his breath uneven, trying to make sense of what had happened. The world around him felt different, subtly wrong in a way that sent cold tendrils of fear through his chest. The trees were taller, their bark twisted and blackened as if charred by fire. The ground beneath his feet was no longer solid but soft, like damp earth freshly dug up. The air smelled of moss and decay, heavy with something unidentifiable. This wasn't the same part of the forest he had entered. Or worse, this wasn't the same world. The whispers around him had changed. They weren't trying to lure him anymore. They were watching, waiting. Something had shifted. A chill ran down his spine as he felt it. The entire forest was breathing. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible. But then he noticed the subtle rise and fall of the earth beneath him, as if the ground itself was expanding and contracting. The trees swayed in unison, though there was no wind. The leaves rustled in a synchronized rhythm, moving with a pulse that didn't belong to nature. The realization clawed at his sanity. The forest was alive, and it was aware of him. A rustling sound came from behind him. Footsteps. Daniel whipped around, his pulse hammering in his ears. There was no one there, but the footsteps didn't stop. They matched his own movements. When he stepped forward, they followed. When he hesitated, they paused. It was like walking with an invisible shadow, something mirroring his every move, step for step, breath for breath. He forced himself to take another step. The echoing footsteps followed. A slow, creeping horror settled into his bones. He wasn't alone, and whatever was imitating him was getting closer. Daniel moved carefully, keeping his steps light, his breath shallow. He needed to get out. He didn't care how. Then, ahead of him, in the dim glow of the mist-covered trees, he saw a figure. His stomach dropped. The figure stood motionless. It was the same height as him, wearing the same clothes. The flashlight that he had lost was clutched in its hand. It was him, but it wasn't. His doppelganger stood there, its face obscured by shadows. Then, without warning, it moved, its head tilting in an unnatural jerk, its mouth stretching into a too-wide grin. Daniel's own voice whispered from its lips, "You're almost home." A sharp, burning pain erupted in Daniel's chest. He gasped, his vision blurring as an invisible force pulled him downward. The ground beneath him had opened up like a gaping mouth. Darkness wrapped around his legs, dragging him into the earth. The soil twisted around his limbs like fingers, pulling, clawing, devouring. The trees loomed over him, their branches stretching like skeletal hands, reaching for him as the whispers rose into a chorus of laughter. Daniel struggled, kicking and clawing, but was useless. The last thing he saw was his doppelganger watching from the trees, smiling as it raised the flashlight and shined it directly into Daniel's eyes. Then darkness. The forest swallowed him whole. Daniel's eyes fluttered open, but the light that greeted him was faint and cold, as though filtered through a dense fog. His body was stiff, his limbs heavy, as if weighted down by invisible chains. His head throbbed, the pounding pressure blurring his thoughts. He lay on the ground, but the earth felt different. It wasn't solid like it should have been. It was damp and spongy like wet moss beneath his skin. A soft, unsettling hum reverberated through the soil, a sound like the pulse of a living creature. As he pushed himself up, the forest around him was eerily still. The trees, once towering and oppressive, now seemed closer, their branches curving inward like a cage. The sky above was a sickly shade of green, streaked with faint, unnatural light. His hands trembled as he wiped the dirt from his face. But there was something far more unsettling than the physical disorientation. It was the silence. There were no birds, no insects, only the soft hum beneath his feet and the occasional crack of a branch far off in the distance. The whispers were gone, but something much more dangerous had replaced them. Daniel's eyes scanned the ground, his heartbeat quickening with each passing second. He couldn't stay here. He had to find a way out. But then, his gaze fell upon the dirt beneath his hands. There, etched into the earth with something sharp, his own name. No, it wasn't just his name. Daniel, Eleanor. The letters were messy, uneven, but clear. They looked freshly carved, as though someone had written them just moments ago. His stomach twisted, and he stood up, scanning his surroundings. A low growl rumbled in the distance, causing his skin to crawl. The sound of the howl sliced through the heavy silence. It was low, guttural, like something primal, something hungry. Daniel's body stiffened, and for the first time since waking up, fear surged through him in a way he couldn't suppress. The howl was followed by another, this one closer. Something was out there, something that wasn't human. His instincts screamed at him to run, but his legs felt like lead, frozen in place by the sheer terror that gnawed at him. The howls were drawing closer, echoing through the trees. Each sound reverberated in his chest, vibrating through his very bones. He couldn't tell whether they were wolves or something far worse. Daniel spun around, searching for an escape. The dense thicket around him seemed to close in, the trees now too close, their trunks gnarled and twisted, their branches forming a solid wall of shadow. He pushed forward, weaving through the thick underbrush, his breath ragged as the howls grew nearer. The path seemed to distort before him, shifting and changing, like the forest was mocking his attempts to flee. Every time he thought he was heading in the right direction, the trees would rearrange themselves, creating a labyrinth that led him back to where he had started. It was as if the forest was playing with him. Out of the mist, a figure emerged. At first, Daniel thought it was Eleanor, that pale face, those hollow eyes. But as the figure stepped closer, he realized it wasn't her. This figure was larger, its body shrouded in a cloak of ragged shadows. Its face was obscured by a hood, but its eyes gleamed from beneath, red, glowing like embers in the dark. The figure didn't speak. It didn't need to. It simply raised its hand, and in the space of a heartbeat, the forest around Daniel began to whisper again, but this time, it was not the same. The voices were harsher, more commanding, like the command of an ancient, forgotten power. And as they spoke, Daniel could feel something stirring deep inside him, something that didn't belong. The figure stepped closer, and Daniel realized it wasn't just a stranger. It was his captor, the one who had been waiting for him all along. The figure moved closer, its presence overwhelming, like a suffocating weight pressing down on Daniel's chest. Every step it took seemed to drain the very air around him, making it harder to breathe. Its red eyes gleamed with an unsettling intensity, and Daniel could feel an unspoken power emanating from it. It was then that the figure spoke, its voice low and rumbling, as if the words were dragged from the depths of the earth itself. "You are mine now, Daniel." The words were simple, but they carried a heavy meaning, an unshakable finality. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest as he struggled to comprehend the full weight of what the figure was saying. He tried to step back, but the forest seemed to close in around him, its branches twisting and shifting like a cage. The figure's presence was a wall he couldn't escape. "This place, it doesn't let go." The figure's voice grew softer, almost a whisper, but still laced with power. "And neither will I." The ground beneath Daniel's feet seemed to pulse, a slow, rhythmic beat that matched the growing pressure in his chest. The whispers, once scattered and chaotic, now began to merge into a single voice, deep, resonant, and all-encompassing. Daniel's body trembled as he fought against the sensation, the overwhelming compulsion to kneel before the figure. The forest's grip was tightening around him, drawing him in. The trees began to bend inward, the branches forming a canopy that blocked out the sky entirely, casting the world into a suffocating, claustrophobic darkness. Something ancient and terrible stirred beneath his feet, something that made his skin crawl. The soil beneath him felt like it was moving, shifting, as if it was alive. The forest wasn't just a place, it was a presence, and it was claiming him. As the darkness deepened, Daniel's gaze was drawn upward. He could see the twisted, gnarled faces within the bark of the trees, staring down at him with hollow, empty eyes. These weren't just trees. They were witnesses, prisoners of the forest, their souls forever bound to the land. Their expressions were warped in agony, their mouths open in silent screams. The faces shifted, contorted in pain, and their hollow eyes followed Daniel's every movement. The air grew colder, the whispering voices echoing from the trees, joining together in a chorus of torment. Daniel staggered back, his breath shallow and rapid. He could feel the weight of the forest pressing against him, its presence suffocating, its thirst for his soul undeniable. The figure stepped forward, its form towering over Daniel. The air grew even colder, the shadows around them deepening, swallowing the remaining light. "Do you understand now, Daniel?" The figure's voice echoed, reverberating through the trees. "This forest has claimed more than just land. It has claimed souls, trapped them in its endless maze of misery. And soon it will claim you too." Daniel's mind reeled at the words, his legs unsteady beneath him. The figure raised its hand, and the ground began to tremble, cracks appearing in the earth as though the entire forest was slowly awakening. "Every soul it claims becomes a part of it." The figure continued. A whisper, a scream, a face in the trees. Daniel's heart raced as he finally understood. The forest wasn't just cursed. It was a prison, a living, breathing entity that trapped the souls of those who wandered too far. And now it was closing in on him. The figure's red eyes glowed brighter, casting an eerie light on its face. It took another step forward, its voice low and heavy with finality. "You have a choice, Daniel." Daniel's mind spun. Escape seemed impossible. The forest had already claimed him, and the figure before him was offering nothing but an impossible decision. "Join us." The figure's voice was almost a caress. "Become one with the forest. Be part of its eternal hunger." Or, the figure's hand raised, pointing to the darkened horizon. Beyond the trees, Daniel saw the faintest flicker of movement, a silhouette in the distance, followed by another, and another, perish, and become just another whisper in the wind. Daniel's body froze. The whispers of the forest grew louder, blending with the figure's words, each one more insistent than the last. He could feel the pull in his chest, the urge to surrender, to give in to the forest call. But deep down, he knew one thing. He couldn't let go. Not yet. The figure's smile stretched wide. It was waiting for his answer. Daniel's heart thundered in his chest as he stared into the figure's glowing eyes. His breath came in sharp gasps, but there was a defiant spark deep within him, something that refused to surrender, something that rejected the forest's pull. No, his voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper, but it cut through the oppressive silence. The figure's expression shifted, a dark amusement flickering across its face. There was no anger, no fury in its gaze, only an unsettling calmness, as if it had anticipated this answer all along. Very well, the figure said, its voice growing colder, darker. But understand this, Daniel. There is no escaping the forest. Not now, not ever. As if responding to the figure's words, the ground beneath Daniel's feet began to quake, the earth trembling with an otherworldly force. The trees seemed to lean in closer, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The whispers rose again, louder this time, more insistent. But there was something different now. The whispers weren't just echoes anymore. They were commands. The forest was no longer simply watching. It was fighting back. Daniel staggered, his legs unsteady, as the ground beneath him split open, revealing black, jagged roots that snaked up from the earth, their tips sharp as daggers. The trees began to groan and creak, their trunks bending and contorting, as though the very forest was coming alive, enraged by his refusal. The air thickened with a suffocating darkness, and the figure before him smiled, its eyes gleaming with malevolent satisfaction. "You have chosen," it said, its voice a whisper now, "but this choice comes with a price." Panic surged through Daniel as he turned, looking for any sign of an escape. He sprinted blindly through the dense thicket, his heart pounding in his ears, his feet stumbling over the uneven ground. The trees loomed like walls on either side of him, their twisted branches reaching out to grab him, pulling him back into the suffocating depths of the forest. But no matter how far he ran, no matter how fast he moved, the forest kept pushing him back, as though it was closing in on him with every step. Every turn he took led him right back to where he started. The paths shifted, the trees moved. The forest was a maze with no end. It was as if it was alive, actively preventing his escape. He could feel the figure's presence behind him, always watching, its gaze heavy and unyielding. The whispers had grown into a cacophony, deafening in their intensity, pulling at his mind, urging him to stop, to surrender. But Daniel didn't stop. He couldn't. Through the thick fog that had begun to settle in the forest, Daniel saw a figure ahead. It was a girl, her silhouette barely visible through the haze. At first, he thought it was Eleanor, but as she stepped closer, he realized it wasn't her at all. This girl was different. She was dressed in tattered clothes, her long hair flowing like a dark river behind her. Her eyes were wide and hollow, her face pale and almost ghostly. She didn't speak, but her presence was undeniable. The moment Daniel locked eyes with her, an overwhelming sense of recognition washed over him. He had seen this girl before, in his dreams. She had been the one calling to him, the one whose face had appeared in the shadows, whose whispers had lingered in his mind. But now, standing before him, her expression was one of pure sorrow, her eyes filled with something far worse than fear, regret. The girl's lips parted as if she were about to speak, but no sound came out at first. Her eyes fluttered as though fighting something invisible, something that was forcing her to remain silent. Then, with great effort, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the roar of the forest's whispers, "You can't escape." The words were heavy, burdened with the weight of experience. "I tried. She stopped, her eyes flashing with something dark, something that made her tremble. "This place, this forest, it's not just a place. It's a curse." Her hands reached out, but the forest recoiled as though rejecting her touch. The ground shifted beneath them, and the trees groaned as if warning them both. Once it has you, it never lets go. You'll become like me, a part of it, forever. Her voice trailed off, and her figure began to fade, the mist swallowing her whole. As the girl vanished, Daniel stood frozen, her warning echoing in his mind. The forest was alive, it was cursed, and there was no escape. The weight of her words settled in, heavier than the oppressive air around him. And somewhere in the distance, the howls began again. The moment the girl vanished, the howls erupted once again. This time, they weren't distant. They were right behind him, tearing through the air like claws scraping against stone. Daniel turned, his heart nearly stopping in his chest. The sound was unmistakable now. The forest had a voice, a hunger that was waking up again, and it was coming for him. The trees bent violently, their branches whipping through the air like whips, as if urging him to run, but there was nowhere to go. The paths were gone, swallowed up by the ever-shifting ground. The very air felt thick with a malice that pressed against his skin. The forest wasn't just alive, it was fighting back. You can't run. The voice of the figure echoed from the shadows, taunting him. The earth beneath Daniel's feet seemed to ripple, as though it was alive and breathing. Before he could take another step, the ground buckled, cracking open in front of him like a hungry mouth. Daniel screamed as he was yanked downward, the dirt and roots grabbing at his legs, pulling him into the earth. He struggled, clawing at the soil, but it was as if the very forest had set its roots deep into his body, pulling him into its depths. With every attempt to escape, the pull grew stronger. The earth was now a prison, and it was swallowing him whole. His screams were drowned by the howls of the forest, the very trees now pressing in on him, suffocating him with their twisted forms. As Daniel was dragged deeper, he caught a glimpse of something terrifying. His own hands were changing, fingers stretching, twisting like the roots of the trees around him. In the darkness, he saw faces, hundreds of them, trapped, screaming, their mouths agape as they merged with the bark of the trees. Their eyes burned with the same despair that he felt growing inside him. They were not just souls, they were part of the forest, part of its eternal hunger. His body began to ache as the forest took hold of him. His skin felt like bark, his bones hollow, like the twisted trunks around him. The transformation was slow, agonizing, but inevitable. Daniel screamed again, but the sound came out not as his own voice, but a hollow echo, a whisper that joined the others in the trees. Just as Daniel thought he couldn't endure any more, the figure appeared before him again. It was now standing amidst the trees, its red eyes glowing brighter than ever. The figure was satisfied, its cold smile stretching wider. "You could have been free," the figure whispered, its voice rich with dark amusement. "But now you're mine, forever." The ground around Daniel shifted again, and he found himself facing the figure, unable to move. The weight of the forest, the transformation, it was all too much. "Submit," the figure urged, a calm finality in its voice. "Be one with the forest. Become part of it." The voices in the trees seemed to hum in unison, an unsettling chorus that resonated in his bones. It felt like there was only one way out: to submit, to give in to the forest's power. But the finality of the decision, to lose himself forever, was too much to bear. But Daniel wasn't ready. Not yet. He still had one last thing to fight for. With every ounce of strength he had left, Daniel fought against the pull of the forest. His body was weak, his limbs trembling, but he held on to one truth that the forest couldn't take away: his will. As he struggled, the howls grew louder, deafening now. The trees groaned, their roots wrapping tighter around him, but Daniel refused to succumb. His heart beat wildly in his chest, his breath shallow, as he made one last, desperate attempt to break free. But then, in the distance, he saw something. A flicker of light, barely visible through the darkness. It wasn't the forest. It wasn't the figure. It was something else, something real. But as he reached toward it, the earth opened up, swallowing him whole. His scream echoed through the trees, but the figure's voice was the last thing he heard. "No one escapes." And then everything went silent. The forest, the whispers, the howls, they were gone. All that remained was the darkness, the endless forest, and the final silence of the one who had tried to break free. And somewhere, deep within the trees, a new whisper began to stir. That was our story for tonight. Do you think it's just an ordinary tale, or is there something more to it? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the next stories. See you if you still dare to watch next time.